I found this little Mary Oliver poem, and I just wanted, it's 4 lines, I promise. Uses of sorrow. The uses of sorrow. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. And this little poem reminded me of what this group of writers has made out of the last year, a year that they did not expect at all. None of us did. But they improvised, they used all their creativity, all their discipline, all of their incredible talent and will, and they produced these amazing books. And so you're going to hear little samples from them today. I'm going to start out by introducing Amy Birch, who's going to introduce our first reader who's coming to us virtually, Carolina Cabada.
I am so excited that I get to introduce Carolina Cabada. When you share an office with Carolina and you see her post a photo of her latest procrastibake, more than once you'll think, will she bring that to campus and share it with me? It doesn't help that you probably just read her most recent workshop submission and the way she wrote about food made you absolutely drool. When you read Carolina's work, you'll encounter floods, Filipino families, and feasts. She's a talented writer, a passionate teacher, and a fantastic cheerleader. I cannot tell you how many times she has picked me up when I felt like nothing I wrote was good enough. For that reason and more, I'm so lucky to call her my friend. So please join me in welcoming the lovely, the talented Carolina Cabada.
All right. Thank you, Amy, for that introduction, and thank you to Anna, Riley, and Amy for putting this together, and especially finding a way to Zoom me in. I am really sad not to be physically in the room where it's happening, but I am excited to celebrate with you all virtually. And so I will be reading the prologue of my thesis. The sun dips into the ocean. Emile is used to seeing this in reverse, the sun emerging from the thick skin of the horizon. Already the world is a mirror, one he cannot step through to the other side, find himself by his lover. First, he must write to her. He doesn't do so until the next day, after he has settled in the camp. By then, he can only see the ocean if he climbs the tallest tree on the highest hill, and even so, it is a haze. He has a pencil he sharpens delicately with a pocket knife. The shavings fall to his knees, then get swept away by a shy, dry wind. Estelle, he writes, my dearest. A dash, then the first word of his missive on the same line of the greeting. Every line on the page counts. Every page that he sends demands brevity, demands depth. It takes him a week to finish. Most often he writes by candlelight in the dark hours before dawn and after sunset. Each day a paragraph, each paragraph half of a small page. In the end, he folds 2 sheets and tucks them into an envelope that is clear of the dirt that now lodges under his fingernails. He trims his nails almost quick short, and still, the dust finds a way to crescent moon his fingertips. Emile stops trying to be clean. There is no one here he wants to impress anyway, descends into slovenliness that almost loses him jobs, even in the fields. But he works faster, stoops low to cut asparagus at dirt level, and that's all any landowner could ask for. His body leaves a mark on his sheets. After the first month, he starts bathing again for the church service on Sundays, scrubbing almost until his skin bleeds before he realizes the soil is his skin. He is too tired to worry about the lack of response from Estelle, writes yet another week-long letter and mails it before he receives anything back. His letters are getting shorter. The blisters on his palms, on the webbing between thumb and forefinger, make it hard to hold a pen. He writes only when he doesn't have open wounds so as not to get blood on the page. A month, then 2 months, each day blurring with only payday and church providing any structure. He eats whatever he can afford after saving, after paying for the square patch of land he has for a shelter, which he cobbled together from broken and restructured crates and cast-offs from the others, sewn together. He saves instead of drinks, takes no chances with the gambling the men do on Saturdays. On Sundays he has no sins to confess. No sin, except the frightful longing in his body for a woman who is not here. Not yet, Emile prays. She simply isn't here yet. 3 months, then 4. To make it through a day, slicing grapes from a vine now, Emile imagines the letter reversing the journey he had made. across the ocean to the bay protected by the slimmest cup of land. The envelope would be placed on the doorstep of the church, which would forward it on to the priest who knew the whole barangay by name. The priest would send one of the altar boys on an errand of delivering the letter, finally, into the hands of Estelle's father. Emile hopes that the postmark from America would stop the man from tossing it. As Emile slices and holds the heavy grapes in one hand, the fruit bundling in the bowl of his palm, he tries not to imagine the other journeys his words could take. Capsized by a sinking ship, lost in the church papers, or stolen by the destitute kids from the docks who use it for warming fires at night. He tries, too, not to write too much, his blisters thickening into calluses that make his hands stiff, tough to open and close. He wonders if every page has made its way to Estelle, if maybe her father intercepted them, if he punished her, then, for the simple act of having a lover who still wants her. Emile doesn't write for another 2 months, nursing himself back to health after an infection that started in the weeping sores of his hands and feet. He eats what the people in the camp can afford to give him, with the next basket of cured hams and apples as a thin letter, addressed to him in the looping script he could read as clearly as if she were there, speaking right in his ear. All right, thank you so much. It is now my honor to introduce our next incredible writer, Eric Williams. Eric writes fiction about food and restaurants, and a regular workshop refrain for his work is, "Reading this made me hungry." He likes the dark irony of 15 minutes of fame. He likes wine and may have a wine problem, according to him, but more for reasons of taste, snobbery, and cost than for the traditional dangers associated with consuming alcohol. He also likes running, riding his bike, and hanging out with his bud Richard, and Eric has been an incredible member of this community. We are so lucky to have him. Please welcome Eric Williams.
All right, thank you. I'm going to read a short piece from my thesis. It's called Salty Greens. Family meal was served twice daily, breakfast at 11 and dinner at 5. Breakfast was eggs, potatoes, and salty salad greens, or sometimes bucatini carbonara and salty greens. Dinner was roast chicken, rice, and salty greens, or pasta with meat sauce, chicken wings, and salty greens. On good nights, dinner was tacos or lasagna. On bad nights, it was chicken stew, with bone-in chicken that scorched the touch and left a hot, metallic taste in your tongue all night, no matter how many mints you ate or how much Fernet Branca you drank. But it didn't matter, breakfast or dinner, good or bad night, there were always salad greens, and they were always salty. Maybe it was a bit of restaurant voodoo, a good luck charm you were careful not to meddle with too much, like the way no restaurant has a table 13. But everyone mused about the greens and their saltiness, and sometimes musing turned something else, like outrage. It was chicken and rice for family meal, chicken and rice and salty greens. Shay stared down at her plate, tried rearranging the offerings to create a more enticing combination. She craved anything but this, thought about asking Henry for something off the menu. He probably would have done it. He loved her, and besides, he had no teeth. A big teddy bear of a chef with absolutely no teeth. But she didn't want to sit there and eat in glory while everyone else suffered. Shay should have eaten on her break, but instead she had a martini. 2 martinis, actually. She wasn't going to order a second one, but Tabitha just replaced her empty glass with a full one, mid-conversation, like it was the only natural thing to do. And so who was Shay to say otherwise? But now she was drunk on an empty stomach, and so she had no choice but to try and countenance another helping of chicken and rice. The greens she couldn't bear. Jake had come into work without so much as a nod. Any moment now he would appear from behind the bar, pop his head through the window into the private dining room, ask for something, the evening's menu, a taste of a new dish, or new wine by the glass, and then once gratified, he would be on his way, just like that. Sometimes he did sit down and eat, but it was worse then. He would address the entire room without ever addressing her. Everyone already knew, so why did he have to carry on like it was still a big secret? Act like 2 nights ago they didn't go home together. Well, at least the team was good tonight. She and Carla were at work best friends, and working with Jeremy was always a riot. Benny was a lush, but he was good at his job, so no one cared. And she was close friends with Sid's girlfriend, Franny, so that made her and Sid close by proxy. She didn't care much for Misha, but she was expert at ignoring her. "Oh my God," Benny said from the other side of the table. "You're going on another trip? You're such a lucky bitch." "I know," Misha said. "I'm so grateful to be able to travel again so soon." "When are you leaving?" "At the end of the month. I have so much to do before then." "Are you going with your family?" Jeremy asked. Shay watched as Misha struggled to field that simple logistical question. Misha was recently back from a trip to India that she couldn't shut up about. Her return brought a new tattoo, "Be Here Now," in Devanagari script on the inside of her left wrist, some handmade street jewelry, and a new outlook on life. "The universe is so vast, but like if you look close, everything is connected," was a new favorite platitude of hers. No one bothered to point out the disconnect between undergoing a so-called spiritual awakening while staying in a five-star hotel paid for by her parents. "No, I'm not going. I'm going home to stay for a few weeks before I embark. I'm going to Hawaii to work on organic farms, and I'm just going to..." Henry came into the room holding a plate of gnocchi. Oh, glory, Shay thought. She was saved. She didn't know why Henry made a set of gnocchi, but she didn't care. Even if she could just have 2 or 3 bites, then that would be enough to satiate her, to return her to a place of peace. "Here you go, Misha," he said, and dropped the plate in front of her. "Thank you so much, Henry," Misha said, uncontrollably gushing. "This looks so good." "I added some extra vegetables in it for you too," he said. "You're the best, seriously, the best." Shay stared at the plate of gnocchi and then at Misha. Privately, she considered the many ways her fork might be used as a weapon. Or better yet, she should cut up all her chicken and force feed it down Misha's throat. The lone vegetarian, Henry made her a special plate of food when there was no other suitable offerings. The most infuriating part was that Misha didn't even have to ask. Henry, who couldn't even keep his cook's schedule straight, seemed always to know when Misha was working. He would stop what he was doing, putting a hold on all the dinner prep so he could personally prepare a meal for her. And judging by Henry's general lack of organization, the kitchen would probably 86 something early tonight because of his interruption in his routine, and yet every time without fail. And of course, that was to say nothing about how little Misha contributed to the team at large. She was a glorified hostess that served poorly. There was a Yelp review that mentioned her by name and compared her service to that of the post office. Apparently, her supply of post-India enlightenment was only channeled into activities that Misha deemed worthy. But really, where was she getting the money for all these trips? A plane ticket to Hawaii was equivalent to a week's serving wages, and that was if you worked all the best shifts. Shay worked all the best shifts, and she could just barely afford to pay her rent. "Where do you get the money to pay for all these trips?" Shay asked. Only then, when she heard her voice, did she realize she was speaking out loud. Misha looked up from her gnocchi. The rest of the room looked at Shay as if noticing her for the first time. To their credit, it had been the first thing she said all meal. "Savings," Misha said, then returned her attention to Benny, and they continued to gush about what a lucky bitch she was. Jake came into the room, saw Misha's plate of gnocchi, and thrust an uninvited fork into it. "You want the rest?" she asked him. "I'm stuffed." Shay observed the two of them and then took a bite of salty greens. Later, when she found out that Jake was leaving too, that he and Misha were traveling together, she swore that in that moment, her mouth full of salty greens, she knew. Thank you. I'm going to introduce Richard now.
He doesn't need an introduction.
Oh, but doesn't he? Hold on, let's see, find this in my phone here. Okay. Okay.
Such a millennial.
Richard Frayling just turned 32, which is 2 to the 5th power, which feels good. He likes his numerical age to be a good, sturdy exponent. This is all you need to know about him, aside from perhaps the fact that sometimes he wishes he could find funding to study the poetics of whale song. And sometimes he just wishes he was a whale. And sometimes, no, that's it. Richard Frayling is a poet from Norfolk, Virginia, and he is a whale. He often feels he can't eat enough krill to get full, but otherwise, it's not a bad life. Richard.
All right. Firstly, thank you for tuning in, everybody who is tuning in, and everybody who isn't tuning in. I'm not talking to you, I guess. But anyway, so my printer stopped working. I was about to destroy it before this, but I didn't. I restrained it, and I have a couple poems on my iPhone. Sorry for that.
Your phone too.
Yeah, sorry for that allusion to violence, but I'm also going to have one last small bit of rebellion, that is to speak a little bit extemporaneously and just say that this is, I mean, there's so much is riding on this for all of us, and I'm just really thankful we can get together and do this in whatever fashion. And I feel, yesterday I'm a little bit sunburned because I just sat instead of actually going to graduation, I just sat on the lawn and just like kind of a little bit comatose. Also, my hip really hurts because I crashed my bike a couple days ago. So I had a hard time getting up, hence the sunburn. And right before that, I had met with a student who wanted to meet with me, who I had a year ago in my English 250 class that was abbreviated. And it was a type of closure, seeing a student of this abbreviated semester that I didn't know that I needed. And it was incredibly emotional. And yeah, so anyways, with that said, this is incredibly meaningful, and my phone just messed up, so give me a second here. I'm just going to read one because it's a longer poem. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to read one, and it's a short poem, and that's okay because I'm going to read it really slow. Because sometimes I like to read poetry really, really slow. Just hang on every word. Okay. So this is a poem that came to me. Poems don't always come to a person, and I've tried to revise this one many times, but I feel like I destroy what it initially was. And it's a little bit nonsensical, it's a little bit dreamlike, and it is the title poem from my thesis. I wrote it about 2 years ago, and it's called Light Streams In Again. Light streams in again after another day left like a car on the roadside, rag in its window, avoiding poetry, not wanting to know how far my heart was from the mark. But lying in bed this morning, as the blinds began their glow, images from yesterday, driving through fields of wind turbines, their blades motionless in the gusts. I realized I only saw them turn as night fell, only by faint light cast from blinking red. Leviathanic lightning bugs, mammoth blades churning like dreams. But during the day, even in a squall, they stand still. Life's excruciating now, passing from us in the night. We wake to the veins in our arms lengthened, alluvial lines spreading from flooded rivers, which themselves have deepened, dammed by thought, change. We wake, faces glistening with the snow melt's fresh silt. You who hide flowers within flowers, Rembrandts for ants' eyes and deeper, a symphony playing of, for itself, the eyeless electrons, the swarm, you who hide beauty inside arteries and every unseen thing, do it again. Thanks. I have a bio to read as well for Riley. And something she didn't write is Riley sometimes in workshops, I love her dogged stubbornness, where sometimes we'll say a change, that couldn't, I don't know, of, something from our own aesthetics. And she's like, no, it is how it is. It's beautiful. And it's about a thing that is beautiful. And some things are just beautiful. You know, you can't dress it up with words, they're just beautiful. So described by a colleague as their lovely extroverted friend of the prairie, Riley is proud to be the Texas-born and Kansas-raised, Much of her recent poetry and nonfiction has focused on diversity and symbiosis within prairie species, humans as an inextricable piece of the natural world, the beauty of childlike wonder, and the nuanced relationship between nature and nurture within families, all of which stems from her awe in a God who is simultaneously an incomparable creator and loving father. So there you go. All right, Riley.
Thank you so much. And if the baby cries during this, sorry, he's mine. But I told him. Okay, so my thesis is a memoir titled Mothers, and it chronicles the journey through my pregnancy as well as the influence of the 5 generations of mothers before me. And it's written in a fragmentary style, so these first 2 pieces I will read are from towards the beginning of my memoir, and they are from my mom, who is watching online. Hi, Mom, I love you. And for all the moms watching, happy early Mother's Day. Beauty. There are many things as you grow older that live in your memory almost passingly, like dandelion tufts on a slow and heavy summer breeze. Not quite a picture, not quite words, not an event or a moment or a scene, but a feeling, a knowing. One such memory of mine is of my mom. I don't remember a specific moment where the thought first came to me or a scene that stirred it. I simply remember that as a child, I believed with every ounce of my still small body that my mom was the most beautiful person in the world. All it took was a glance of her face to make me swell. Soft, high cheekbones like porcelain, blue-green eyes edged by straight, dark brows and brown feathered bangs. The ruddy red of her lipstick that she reapplied in the car visor mirror and left smudges of on plastic straws. Beauty again. Now grown, I see my mom more clearly. I notice the gray that starts to peek out at her roots before she has time to touch it up with another box of dye. I see the deep-seated groove between her brows, her worry line, the one she frets over in pictures and tries to cover with her bangs. Bangs are cheaper than Botox, she often says, laughing. I see the way powder makes her cheeks smooth, how her wardrobe is filled with loose-fitting shirts that can hide her belly, the lines that curl from the corners of her eyes, her smile, the scar on her chin from crashing a moped when she was 14, the way years of Texas sun have spotted her arms and chest. And she is all the more beautiful for it. So then I have just 2 more fragments to share with you guys, and these ones touch on my experience with antepartum depression. Stolen. You seem preoccupied with death, a friend tells me after reading some of my work. How can I not be, I want to ask, though at the same time I understand what she means. Half of my writing, which she has also seen, is poetry about the prairie. Joy dressed up in the yellow of goldenrod and sunflowers, the brilliance of plant roots tunneling hundreds of feet deep into rich brown soil. I wonder suddenly if I have lost my ability to write joy. Wonder if this is yet another thing depression has stolen from me. When I think back on this pregnancy, will I only think of darkness? When I remember the first 9 months of our son's life, when he was still swaddled like a seed inside me, will I only remember the mud? How it felt like I would never stop sinking deeper and deeper down. A catalog of joy. 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, like a sunrise. The first time we heard your heartbeat booming. Ben caressing my stomach with open palms as he tried to feel your first tiny kicks. And now the incessant beating of your feet against my right side, the way the crescent of your back presses tight on the left. Your hiccups like distant tapping near your head nestled low. The orange maple leaves taped to the dining room window, how the sun shines through them, how I can enjoy them now in the middle of winter. Being pregnant at Christmas, seeing Mary with new eyes. The way the cat sometimes comes to sit on the shelf of my belly. The way the dog thinks the baby toys are for him. The sun and the sky and the rabbit tracks and the snow. Watching my belly grow and grow and grow, the freckle in my belly button I never knew I had, my leaking breasts readying for you, the purple stretch marks on my thighs, that I'm still here, that the world is still beautiful, and that soon you will get to see it and touch it and taste it and love it for all it is and isn't. Thank you. Okay, and for some reason, this is what I get for relying on a tablet instead of paper. My bio I prepared for Allison isn't here, so here we go, ad lib. Okay, so it is my dearest privilege to introduce to you my brilliant colleague and wonderful friend, Allison Boyd Justice. Allison, who grew up in Tennessee, is still completely dazzled. I'm not sure if that's the word she used, but I'm gonna go with it. Completely dazzled every time it snows, even though she has now experienced 3 Iowa winters and is about to experience Alaska winters. Regardless, she delights in nature. She has her Master's of Arts in, remind me? New Testament Studies, there we go, from Freed-Hardeman University. And much of her writing focuses on things that she has studied, theology, feminism in the Bible. She put this in much better words when she wrote it out in her bio, but I am bad and don't have it in front of me. So you will see when she comes up here and reads her wonderful poems. But what I will add, I do remember the part I was going to add to the bio. And that was, one, to brag on the fact that Allison won a Research Excellence Award for her thesis. Yes, that deserves applause. And 2, I just want to say that her words and the way that she weaves them together just so clearly reflects the beauty of and the grandeur of God foremost, but also it reflects the beautiful, wonderful, curious, generous, joy-filled heart that is her own. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Allison.
Thank you. Okay. I'll read 4 poems from my thesis, In Our Image. Watching Notre Dame burning, I see my own mind. Inferno of ancient dry oak interlaced, fire fed by cavernous emptiness. Spire as aspiration falls, vaulted interior aflame. Traceries, buttresses, towers, embattled molding, gargoyles, rose windows. What frame remains? Churches in particular are vulnerable to fire. Highest aspirations, the most hazardous. Remember when Babel collapsed? Language splintered to kindling. Own interior charred, own spire collapses in shame. I call it spiraling. What spirit arrives as flame? Rahab as mother bereft. With her life open wide, room in every direction and worst possibility realized, Rahab made more room. Room on the roof, room for new recognition. Rahab reckoned resistance as futile. Her house in the wall too would fall. So watching the moonrise, she bartered with truth, truth for life, lying to hide spies safe at the inn in the wall for some post-rebel place among strangers and too abrupt waning. Rahab ran a blood-red ribbon out her own window and then gathered everyone in, next of kin, next of anyone, open as night drifted lucent toward ruin. Over the city, the moon, full past waning, reflected tired light from sun never met. After the thunder, a silence of grief and of sweet suffocation of loss seeped possessively into the angles of every crack in the wrecked city's bricks. Rahab rose to give birth to whatever new world. As if the moon remained whole, as if reflection could not be obscured. When she first spoke, Rahab knew she wasn't the mother of anyone. Yet there she was, mothering suddenly, strangers and enemies, covering lovingly heralds of ruin with flax as though shielding from terror some child of her own. Now no guerdon save life, open, or hemmed in back and before. What wall, what stones sealed, what seal strong enough, stronger, what seal stronger than sharp, brittle death? When the mother knew Diogenes never watched his child convulse. Chasing the son of the hounded scoundrel king on the run, who starving scarfed the holy bread of presents down unpunished, she bellowed. Shaken by her ceaseless howl, his friends begged him to chase her off. He said he'd only come for lost sheep of the god wrestler. She heard, "Are you a god wrestler?" and rising answered yes. He said, "It isn't good to toss the children's bread to dogs." She answered, "Yes, and dogs can eat the crumbs. Your children don't eat neatly, and the table's heaped. Steaming, yeasty loaves of wheat and barley rise piled high, a surplus of tumbling abundance. Yeast cannot stay hidden. After sudden feast, a dozen baskets brimmed. Hipparchia's daughter, limp, crusty triumph, persist until stones break as bread. And the question of bargain. 1, thirst. We tried to translate every word and turned to poetry impelled by gaping apophysis. 2, threshold. If this is the door, if to one another we are portals, if to one another we are higher, lower, last and first and seen, known, if love is comprehension, if with one another we keep living treasure, if to one another we are living doors of love. 3, thirst. After shatter. Spirit as tree within roots deep. Drinks. It is my honor and delight to introduce Bree Stover. Bree came to ISU with a degree in theater and English. She is a multi-genre writer. She's taken workshops in like anything that she could, script writing, poetry, fiction, and she is a novelist, which is itself incredible. That takes incredible commitment and vision. And through taking as many different workshops as she has had opportunity to, she's discovered a love for each way of writing, and she's really proud of the growth that has happened in just 3 years. Justifiably so. Bree is not only a multi-genre writer, she is an actress, she is a dedicated, hardworking teacher, she is a supportive friend and cohort member. She is an advocate, and she will not allow herself or her readers to settle for a single story. She's brave and bold, and in the bio that was given me to read, she enjoys finding the connection between people in her environments. Yes, and she enjoys immersing herself fearlessly in environments and allowing those to change her in beautiful ways. Whether that be a new genre workshop, a new country, a new role in a show, a new role as a teacher. She persists, finding and forging connections to allow herself and others to thrive. Bree is fireworks. Bree is candle flame. She is morning mist and ocean spray. I'm done. Let's hear from Bree.
Thank you, Allison. That was better than any bio I could have wrote. So picking 5 minutes out of a 400-page book is really difficult. So some things to know before I get into this is my thesis was a young adult to new adult novel. It was told in 6 perspectives, and the people within it can control either earth, fire, water, or air. So jumping right in. Yo, if you don't get out of this bathroom right now, I'm telling Mom, Garrett shouts on the other side of the door. I run my hands down the side of my face, the water I just splashed to wake me up, sliding onto my shirt and the countertop. He does this every morning, like he doesn't realize I'm on the same schedule for work. Evan! 2 minutes, Gare! I shout above his fist pounding against the door. Damn, I say under my breath. I splash more water in my face. If this is how the day is starting, it's going to be way too long for my liking. Maybe if I just splurged a bit to buy lunch instead of making one before leaving the house, I could take the long way to work through the park. The weather was still nice enough for it. I throw the door open and Garrett shoves past me. I decide it's not worth reminding him to hurry up or the next person will get on his case about how long he's taking. Too bad there's only one bathroom in this house, just past the kitchen. Central location, but not quick enough for all the traffic going through. I go into the kitchen where Zoe and Skylar are sitting at the table, eating some cereal and wearing some of it too. Good thing we know not to put them in their school clothes before breakfast. Andy is watching them from the kitchen, a wide grin on her face at my expression. I make my way to where she's standing and grab a granola bar out of the cabinet. They're getting bigger every day, she says affectionately. I glance back at the two. Zoe is 6 and Skylar is 7. They'd been something called Irish twins. Andy and Jeremiah had thought Skylar would be their last, and then they had Zoe when he was 11 months. 2 in diapers with my own sister still being practically a toddler drove me nuts. It feels like it's been forever to get this far, and they're still little and messy. But Andy keeps smiling. I'll tell you what, soon enough Zoe will be wearing makeup instead of her cereal, and then we'll all be in trouble. Uh-huh. Sure, Auntie, I tell her, grabbing another granola bar for good measure. Before I know it, I'm at the park. The leaves still have green at their base, but some have been fully submerged in the golds and reds of the coming fall. I breathe in the musk and earth that ripples throughout the park. Each scent, sound, and vibration from the earth is stronger to me than even other elementals, so I've gathered from years of speaking to the people around me. They don't experience the same kind of hum that comes up from the earth and curls around me like nature is trying to speak to me. Though the cement walkways feel more artificial, life still thrums in each slab of the fused earth. I tilt my head towards the sun, but the air is still chilled with the morning dew, the sun barely peeking from behind the clouds as the days are starting to become shorter. There are a few people milling about the park as well, sitting on benches or taking their dog out for a morning walk. I nod to a couple of them politely, but there seems to be this unspoken agreement this morning that it's our time to exist in this space and to think through whatever is on our minds. My mind always feels like it's racing with fear for my family and our new home, keeping up at my job and even all the lives I'm not living. The park is a place for my mind to quiet. Only the earth's voice matters here, and isn't that how it should be? My parents said I was an emotional kid, even for kid standards. I could feel the earth cry out when trees were hacked down or when there was a chemical spill. It felt magnified, and even though as I grew older, that connection faded some, or at least I've become more numb to the stark pain of losing the natural world, I'm still all too aware of the horrors we inflict into nature. And yet, elementals want to fight over who holds power. They want to fight to be visible instead of actually nurturing a dying planet back to health. Where the hell are our priorities? I can't imagine trying to argue with someone over the semantics of how we should get into a political office or forcing elementals to fight against each other for control when we should be regrowing forests, cleaning the pollution out of lakes, separating smog from ozone.
I know that elementals and non-elementals alike should be doing so much more to take care of the world around us. Even those of us who are more connected to the elements of nature still can't seem to find the desire to take care of it. All anyone wants is power and control, but by the time we've achieved it, what will be left? My factory looms in front of me, people milling outside having a cigarette before going in to start their shift. Some of them are blissfully unaware of the secrets the world has been fighting to keep from them, and others are elementals, keeping those secrets and keeping themselves hidden. I wonder if any of the elementals around me have the thoughts I do. My parents and Andy and Jeremiah always talk about a free and quiet life where they don't have to watch their backs. There's never been any mention about helping the earth heal. Sometimes I feel like the prisoner in this life. All right, now I have the lovely privilege of introducing Miss Julia Billick. She is a poet, creative nonfiction writer, playwright, and collaborative artist. I have looked up to her since going into our script writing class first year and realizing there was another theater person here, and she was super cool. Before her work at Iowa State, Julia earned a master's degree in cultural anthropology and was an active member in the performing and visual arts communities in the Washington, D.C. area. She often writes about her home state of Maryland, which she would like me to say is the best state, as well as her travels in the deserts of the American Southwest and Central Asia. Her beautiful writing transports you to these places. She weaves histories together until they've spun into a story or poem that captures you as a reader. I feel so lucky to have been here in this cohort with her, and I will miss our car rides after classes. Okay, I already have. We haven't been able to do that in a little while, but I will always keep her words with me. Here is Julia.
As you've heard, I have preferences, but today I'll be talking about another state which has begun to grow on me. We've been living in Iowa a full year before I learned that my grandmother was born in Hubbard, just 40 minutes northwest of us, and her great uncle, who had sponsored her family's immigration from Germany, was a donor to my university. It was a particularly poignant connection, as my grandmother was the artist in my family and a source of inspiration for my creative life, the reason I was pursuing an MFA at all. Still, it took nearly 2 more years for me to explore those connections. By then, I knew we would be staying in Iowa longer than I anticipated, at least a year. I had contracted COVID, and a host of debilitating physical and cognitive long-term effects were still with me 8 months later. It was a hard time to be so far from family, so far from home. I felt the distance acutely. My husband encouraged me to finally take up the search for my grandmother's great-uncle Gustav's grave, the only tangible evidence of my familial ties to Iowa. We knew he owned a farm near Hubbard, and my aunt had the official affidavit of support he had signed for my grandmother's immigration to the US. It listed his age and enough other relevant details that within a few hours of searching online, I found Gustav's grave listed in a cemetery near where my grandmother was born. A few weeks later, my husband and I drove to the cemetery and began walking its rows, looking for a short list of names. Gustav, his wife, and his 2 children were all buried there according to cemetery records. We found the children first, and then their children. And then, to my growing wonder, I realized that nearly the whole community was tied together through 3 or 4 last names married into and descended from my family. I was surrounded by kin. And there were other surprises. I was both amused and chastised to see the last name of my most difficult student. He had mentioned he grew up on a family farm in Iowa. He'd been among the students who balked when I said I had lived in the Midwest before because I was born in Chicago. Chicago's not the Midwest, they laughed. He actually made that class hell. Ken, I wondered if you would see it that way. Many of the names I saw in the cemetery had actually come up in my searches online with connections to still living relatives still living in Iowa. Slowly, it dawned on me. I was surrounded by kin. Not just here at Hubbard Cemetery, but the whole time I was in Iowa, surrounded by kin, both living and the dead. My student, the dozens of other Native Iowans I had taught, kin, the cashier at Target whose voice sounded uncannily similar to my grandmother's, kin. My map shifted. I was born in Chicago. My mother was born in Chicago, and so was her mother. My father was born in Michigan. My grandfather in St. Louis. My grandmother was born right here, beside me in Iowa, where I was surrounded by kin. In my imagination, the Midwest had been a stopping ground between Europe and the places where we finally landed. The East Coast, California, Colorado, Alaska, but I'd never been as far from home as I had imagined. When we finally came to Gustav's grave, which we thought we might have missed in perhaps a different Hubbard graveyard, I put my hand on it and gave thanks. Now I get to introduce Nancy Hayes, who has just all the heart of this entire cohort and all of the energy that all of us have sort of combined in her essence. She is actually a native Iowan and probably kin. She went east to school and then further east to Germany for 10 years, but luckily came back and settled in Davenport, where she and her husband raised 3 children. You're here? You are here. After commuting to Iowa City for her doctorate, she enjoyed teaching Shakespeare at St. Ambrose University for 20 years. She then strapped on her backpack to join fellow MFAers in Ames, where she has written the most wonderful prairie poetry and essays about her family's Southeast Iowa prairie. And I will give her special thanks because I would not have gotten through the last year without her. Why don't you come read some poetry?
Hello. Quite an introduction. Where did my energy go? Thank you, Julia. My daughter Marion, I believe, is out there in Reno, and she couldn't be here. So I love you, Marion. I'm going to read 4 poems, and my thesis title is Precarious Paradise, Toolsboro, Iowa. These poems are about the prairie. Ancient Grief. 8 mounds were built 2,000 years ago of sacred earth transported to a bluff above the Iowa River's steady flow by grievers trudging up through sorrow's throes, switchbacking steep terrain and rough. 8 mounds heaped tall 2,000 years ago. They scooped the silty soil, they bent down low and brimmed their braided baskets full enough beside the Iowa River's steady flow. Their dead they carried high to lay down low, to cover them with sheets, their finest stuff. 8 mounds piled wide 2,000 years ago, Beside them, pearl and shell beads they bestowed, placed bird-shaped pipes in afterlife to puff, of pipestone, pearl-eyed, for better sight below. We are their kin. We also sorrow know, at graves' side, staring down from brink-sharp bluffs. 8 mounds were built 2,000 years ago, above the Iowa River's steady flow. For the beauty of the prairie, of the ox-eye's yellow rays trained on the haze-rimmed rising sun, of the sparse pink sprays of showy tick, whose leaves Japanese beetles nibbled down to lace beneath a blush rose glimmer, of the prairie blazing stars' pink-purple fuzzy column, flaming cattail, sparkler in mid-sizzle, drama queen on spiky stalk, of the yellow coneflower's evolution from gray seed head, circled by pale points, to dark brown cone with drooping golden petals, languid in the summer breeze. Of the culver's roots, small candelabras, lighting rabbits' leafy banquet tables. Of the white wild indigo's tall spires of full round blooms that broadcast brightness over late June evenings, dusky green. Of big blue stems bolt in hot July, past oxeye, showy tick, past blazing star and yellow coneflower, culver's root, on upward past proud white wild indigo, to bob above, tickling wings of darting swift and swallow, stirring souls to sing this song, this our hymn of grateful praise. The color of prairie. We watch for green after the March burns black. For familiar leaves, we see forbs and grasses rise from ashes, observe habits of growth, know which surge in May, which hold back until August. We applaud blooms, golden Alexanders early, sawtooth sunflowers late. In between, with relative overlap, rattlesnake master, compass and cup plants, showy tick trefoil. Each year, its own panoply, but always mostly yellows, though plenty of pinks and purples, some whites, and one orange, butterfly milkweed. We note golds, bronzes, taupes, mauves of big and little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, breathless. We grasp the transience of color, except green we take for granted. Until September, we take in the general fade, the collective dry, yet even then, in the mounds of blown over grass, hints of former hues, palest yellows and blushes of red glow under a coat of snow. This last one is for my husband. Inflorescence. The late October sun spreads thick its golden light across our prairie grasses, stalk by stalk. One last warm coat before the chill of night. No longer moist and green, no goldenrod in sight. The sallow stems sag toward us as we walk. The late October sun spreads thick its golden light. Yet we know with the paling, life's not faded quite. Before the rising shadows, no cause for us to balk. One last warm coat before the chill of night. Don't think for long, there'll be no respite. The bobbing, feathered seed heads feed our talk. The late October sun spreads thick its golden light. Though leaves have curled, dry culms have lost their might, they still protect the prey coyote stalk. Their rustling signals rabbits to take flight. Last rays Swab, blue stems in fluorescence bright, with strokes of liquid gold. We cease to talk. The late October sun spreads thin its golden light, one last warm coat before the chill of night. I have a great honor. For our next speaker, I will read exactly what he wrote, because we know, just as Michael hopes, his work will speak for him, even though he was required to write a bio. Here it comes. So here we are. Michael's works explore themes of individual identity and cultural zeitgeist, often through false documents and extensive world building. He works mostly in fantasy, historical, and epistolary fiction, and exclusively in long-form novels. He has nothing against short stories. They and he just have never gotten along. So he'll do his best to stay under 5 minutes. I know this will be hard for him, but our self-effacing Michael will most assuredly bedazzle us with his brilliance. And I just have to say, I love this guy.
Hello, campers. I hope we're all comfortable. Can I move this a little bit? This?
You should keep it close so they can hear you.
I brought a computer. I went the 21st century solution. I should have brought paper. So, so my thesis is called The Hymn of the Harvest. It's a collection of false documents. So there'll be journals and letters and stuff. So that's just letting you know ahead of time. So here are things like timestamps to let you know when something is happening. But I have a little bit of an introduction. Again, I timed it. I'm maybe like 3 seconds over. That's pretty good for me. So this is like in the middle of the book, so I have to kind of bring you all up to speed. So, So imagine yourself in East Berlin, 1990. Your estranged mother has sent you a letter saying that you are descended from a lost Alpine nation called the Waldereich and has tasked you with finding it. So you track down the last descendant of the Waldereich royal family, one Nils August Klein, living in West Berlin, and ask him for his help. Instead, for some reason, he tells you he's going to throw away any and all papers that might be useful to your search. So what do? Why, you go with your allies into the West and steal his garbage, of course. This is where Amelia Austin, our main character, finds herself now and where we join her. So we'll be reading from her journal. So this is the day of the great garbage heist. So time, 11:56. Yeah, and this will be in 24-hour military European time. No work getting done at the museum today. The staff is starting to notice that we're rudderless. We're getting no help from the government, of course. It's busy falling apart. Rudder or no, if I can't steer us out of this becalmed strait, I won't be captain for much longer. But maybe it's better that way. I don't even feel like I'm entirely here anymore. Here in this chair, here in this skin. And tonight I'll be doing something I never thought I'd be capable of doing, all for the sake of spite. I think Dad was right. I just want to find the Waldereich so I can see Mom again, so I can show her what I found and keep it from her, just to hurt her. It's not a very good Mother's Day section, I realize. 2002, walking out west with Dieter now. Accidentally called him D earlier. He doesn't seem to mind. What he does mind is the West. Thinks this whole place is what he calls counterfeit, from its music down to its currywurst, which he calls the, quote, product of somebody that Nuremberg missed. Currywurst is serious business. But I caught him more than once, looking sidelong, fascinated at all the tall cathedrals and the candy glossy BMWs. I think I know why. They're both like promises, one of the past and one for the future, permanence and potential, things neither of us really have much of. Why do we only ever seem to want things that we can't have or things that might be bad for us? 2044, we're in position. I left Dee in the bushes behind the empty house 2 doors down from August Klein's place. He already tore up the for sale sign from the front lawn. Paul showed up in his car. He got his hands on 2 empty trash cans for us. One's with Dee, filled with bricks. One's with me, empty. And I'm in the hedges on August Klein's property line. Paul will keep hanging around, keeping his car in the empty house's driveway in case we need a getaway. Plus, it makes the house look more inhabited, less suspicious. The plan is for August Klein to put out his garbage probably just a few minutes before the truck comes by. Dee drags out his can, makes the poor garbage men wait on him and then waste their time dumping out a bunch of bricks. Then I dart out, dump August Klein's can into my empty can, then dart back into the bushes, rejoin Dee and Paul. Writing it all out now, it's a little ramshackle, isn't it? Like, what if August Klein shreds all of his papers beforehand? I mean, I guess it's a good thing that there's plenty of ex-Stasi in need of employment. Maybe I could pay them by promising to lose the files we keep on them in our museum. No, even for this, that's a little too far. Stealing trash is one thing, hiring it, that's another. 2048. Really upscale neighborhood here. It's like a parade of chandeliers and televisions and sofas of colors that aren't gray. It even smells more alive. 2059. If I want to leave here, where I am in my life, I can't be weighed down. You can't make it very far hauling a trash can full of bricks. Which means Arthur, I should have told him that I knew his secret when I called him last, or when we walked Monster at the park when it was warm a couple weeks ago, or last Wednesday when we had sex on his floor while an American movie that I can't remember the name of played on his grainy TV. I somehow forgot he'd been spying on me for the Stasi for years until right now. Maybe not forgot, just chose not to remember. When is not forgiving the right thing to do? 2130, something's wrong. August Klein's garbage can still isn't out yet, and the truck is coming. 2137, Dee's done his part, bought me as much time as he could, but still no August Klein. Garbage truck drove right past his place. 2143, August Klein's leaving his house, getting into his car, carrying something, put into his passenger seat, a box, a big ornate box. He's got the Walderweich in that box, I know it. Paul starting his car, Dee's flagging me down. I'm leaving, I'm going, I'm coming. Now, it is my privilege to introduce a very good friend of mine, Dan Pankratz, who wrote the smallest bio in human history, so I expanded it. So he describes himself as an artist who values storytelling and genuine compassion, which is put very succinctly. However, he's also an author unafraid to explore the dark caves of the soul in search of monsters, not just to slay them, but to listen to their reasons for being. And maybe more so than all that, he's a fierce friend who works harder than anyone I've ever known at helping those he cares about be the best they can be, and he speaks with the authority of a modern-day shaman. Get over here, Dan.
I'm going to surprise everybody. I'm not wearing beads or dreadlocks, so and I won't read you any Zen koans or anything. So my thesis is a science fiction novel about a homeless shelter on the moon, and a couple people here know my personal work history and experiences was quite literally at a homeless shelter. And I put it on a moon because that's quite literally what it felt like working there. That's just as a brief a description of the entire text as I can give you, but here's just a snippet of it that people have heard in multiple workshops. So it's called It Helps. I know a great joke about HIPAA, a man chuckled at the end of the staff meeting, but I can't tell you. Closing her interface, Israel's gaze fell on the staff member who had told the joke during the staff meeting. Paul Anderson, always dressed differently from the others in a plain white tracksuit with a little decoration on a string around his neck. The mental health counselor carried a physical sketchbook filled with pencil drawings of ravens, human eyes, disembodied figures, trees, shattered glass, which she was currently showing to an interested volunteer. Noticing this sketchbook for the first time, Israel, the staff coordinator, found herself wanting to know more about him. It was rare for anyone on the moon to do art without a digital interface, simply due to the available supplies, so these details caught her attention. No one else on staff seemed to be an artist other than her. That, and Paul always wore an expression like someone who had just found out their greatest rival had just died in a hysterical accident. And so Israel watched as Paul gathered his sketches again. He departed for the staff office. And so, armed with several questions, Israel followed him. Maybe he could help her sort something out. Good morning, said Paul, even though there were no mornings or nights on the moon, just the cycles of numbers on digital screens and interfaces. Good morning, Israel replied cheerfully. Is it true you use art and painting in therapy sessions with clients? Paul nodded and he lofted his sketchbook briefly. Israel stared at it. What do you think about art helps people recover? Setting the sketchbook down, Paul scratched the bristles of his whitening beard. His cracked lips opened with potential words, then closed, and the moments where they stop and wonder, he decided. His gaze remained thoughtful, focused on the open space beyond the great glass window of the staff office. His response disarmed Israel. What do you mean? Well, I work with the addicts, slate, red tar. Those are the most common around here because of the spaceport. But take any guests that I or we work with, from our specific population. Most arrive here dealing with serious withdrawals from some kind of drug. They're shaken, shattered, no self-esteem. They hate themselves. And in this state, I have to sit them down and we draw. It starts a dialogue. And at some point they look at me, and I swear this happens with almost every patient recovering from addiction, and they ask me in a quiet voice, am I an artist yet? Together they gaze through the glass window of the office. They stop and they wonder, Paul Anderson continued. And I have to push them through that doubt. Am I an artist yet? That doubt is everything. It's the reason they're here in the first place. They hate themselves. They doubt themselves. His mouth formed a thin but sympathetic line. Paul turned aside and gathered his sketch pads, and Israel could see the deep veins across his old wrinkles that could be easily punctured, and the deep sadness and grief that inhabited his innermost thoughts as he spoke to her. Israel wondered where that sadness had come from. He had seemed so excited and energized before. The art helps, the man insisted. And it was then that Israel noticed the 30-year sobriety pin that shone around his neck. The art always helps, he said. All right, I'm going to break the voice of fiction here and speak as myself briefly. I think I have a little bit more time, but I just wanted to share something that I read every single morning to myself. This is my mantra, and so I just want us to consider for a moment, what is thought? What is it, my friends, to take thought? Took you then thought today? What thoughts did you think today? What thoughts were part of your original first thought today? And how many of your thoughts did the creation abide? Was love contained? Was love contained? And was service freely given? Because we are not part of a material universe. You are part of a thought. We are dancing in a ballroom in which there is no material. You are dancing thoughts. You move your body, your mind, and your spirit in somewhat eccentric patterns because we have not completely grasped the concept that we are all part of one original thought. We writers are thinkers. We write our thoughts down. Everything is thought. Thank you for this incredibly productive container. I choose the path of the artist, and I release myself of this container. So with that, I would like to welcome Anna McCracken. So it is my great pleasure to introduce someone whose passion and intensity I deeply admire, especially with feedback and responses. I loved your voice in workshop, so that's off script. But what the script you gave me is that you graduated from Iowa State with a BS in fashion merchandising. And she never imagined returning to live in Ames. So if you read her memoir about the search for her birth mother, again, Mother's Day being the theme, you'll understand why Anna is accustomed to living a serendipitous and full-circled life. So while completing her memoir in the creative writing program here, Anna has also gained an appreciation for prairies, and her next project is to write stories about postcard prairies while planting one of her own. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Dan. Today I'm going to read from my memoir, Redacted, a memoir of adoption. I have been writing this memoir for 22 years, and it's taken me this long to land on an ending. This is now new writing that's writing towards the end of the memoir, and it takes place in present day. I wrote the rest in past. 22 years since I sat with my birth mother on the day she died, along with her husband, Keith. The day my birth mother died was the first time I met her outside of the day I was born. My breathing is shallow as I pick up my iPhone and swipe to dial the iPad. I tap in what I believe is Keith's number. My husband has scribbled all sorts of numbers and addresses upon a creased sheet of paper laying center on my desk. The number rings. I breathe in, I breathe out. My C6 and protruding bone at the base of my neck ache. My torso feels flush. My armpits are leaking. I've waited for 10 a.m. on Thursday to dial Keith's number. February 11th, a day with no personal history other than it's 10 days away from the 22nd anniversary of Anita, my birth mother's passing. Besides asking Keith how he is after all these years, I want to know, what did he do with Anita's ashes? Keith's white van is parked behind the store. We're in Hinckley, Minnesota now. Keith's white van is parked behind the storefront where he said it would be. I realized my grip on the steering wheel. And grip it again. I drive around the block a third time and park in front of the post office. I check my eyes for mascara smudges, pull my lipstick from my purse and apply it. It feels important to freshen my makeup, even though I've grown accustomed to wearing no makeup during COVID. I look back across the street to the long walk to the back door of Keith's store and turn on the SUV and drive around the block again. I settle on a spot in the sun across from Keith's curio shop, which looks like a smaller version of the one he owned in Duluth. The street is a junk store junkie paradise. Keith told me to come to the back door, so why am I worried he'll see me through the cracked windows, mostly covered with plywood? I know it's my Mercedes, the affluence it communicates, the acknowledgement I have made it better in life than my birth mother. Making my way around the building, I tiptoe through slush in my black and white plaid Converse high tops, taking care not to dirty the bright white toes. The snow crunches as I approach a lean-to, which I imagine houses a toilet and shower. I rap upon it. As I pass it, a door reveals itself. Without thought, I rap upon it and step back. The sky is a blazing blue, the air crisp and chilled, still at noon. I slap my palm loudly on the wood. Something creaks on the other side. A head of disheveled white hair appears, and Keith, peering up from his stooped torso, smiles, gestures for me to enter. He's not wearing a mask. Do you want me to wear a mask? I say, remembering his hesitancy to meet in person. No. He shuffles off down a long hallway, flanked by towering shelves. He stops and picks up a frame and presents me with a childhood portrait of Anita, sitting hands clasped, bright-eyed, her bobbed hair clipped with bangs. I have a smaller version at home. Keith thrust photos printed on foam cord at me. I recognize them as the photos we set up next to Anita's photo album and vase of flowers in St. Paul's Chapel in Duluth. You can have these. You can have these slides. If you can't see them, I'll throw them away. No, I grab them. I have a thing to view them with, a place that will make photos out of them. I have her fur coats, Keith says. He disappears around a corner. I set the pile of photographs on a cabinet. As I round the corner, Keith thrusts a gray fur coat at me. I bought these for her. She liked fur coats. I recognize him from photographs I have stared into for over 22 years. The metal hook of the hanger falls around my curled index finger. I hold the coat away from me. The fur is ratty. I imagine dust mites. You might want this one, Keith says. I'm sure I'm too big for it. Keith turns and eyes me. She was 5'9" and 135 pounds. Oh, I'm too big. I'm 5'11" and 175 pounds. Keith turns back to the 4 coats hanging precariously from the edge of a shelf. He pets them. The shelves swallowing us are crammed with books and dishes, boxes teetering above us. Ceiling tiles are stained and askew. Electrical wires strung from rafters sag and vanish into boxes or stacks of books. I imagine Keith's demise, burned alive or buried under a cascade of junk. Take the fur cap, Keith says. It's not as scrappy as the others. She wore it in the photograph of her standing in the dining room area in the London Roadhouse, I say. I take it from him. Keep it as a souvenir. He shuffles around me, back down the hallway. Maybe I'll burn it with the documents I brought from my remembrance ceremony tomorrow on the banks of Lake Superior. Thank you, everyone. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Amy Birch, who believes her best review came from a 3-year-old William who said, "That's Amy, I like her." A fellow Illinoisan, she's originally from Springfield, Illinois. She's a graduate of University of Illinois Springfield and Iowa State University. Drawing on her journalistic background, Amy mostly writes nonfiction, focusing on such topics as family relations, the importance of place and identity, sports, and physical and mental health. What I will always, she's our last speaker. What I'll always remember about my time with Amy is the vivid imagery in her writing that had me running alongside her during her middle school track races, and the colorful characters of her grandparents, particularly Grandma May, who was a wave during World War II. Take it away, Amy.
All right, so this is a small sample of an essay I wrote about my Grandma May. With graduation, this first sentence hits a little bit differently than it did when I wrote it. So this is a brief portrait of May. Harriet May Buffington wanted to go to college. Her father, however, told her it was a waste for women to go to college. He believed there was no point in a woman receiving higher education when she would just go and get married and raise children. So May, as she preferred to be called, decided to take matters into her own hands. World War II had just begun, and the military was recruiting women to serve and join the war effort. In December 1942, May and a girlfriend decided to join the Women's Auxiliary Corps, or WAC, of the U.S. Army. However, somewhere between making this decision and ultimately enlisting, May and her friend changed their minds. They decided to join the U.S. Navy's Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, or WAVES, because as May would tell her granddaughter, me, decades later, the uniforms were cuter. I love this image of my grandmother. I can see her, headstrong, determined to go do something, to pursue some sort of education in the face of patriarchal opposition. Her joining the WAVES was an act of rebellion. I am not sure if my grandmother would have ever thought of herself as a feminist, but this move seems like a feminist one to me. Clearly, May saw images of military women and knew some of what the fashion required, but it made me wonder what other kinds of messages told her the WAVES were cuter. And why was it that my great-grandfather, so adamant that his daughter not go to college, was okay with May going off into the military? Knowing my grandmother, I kind of wonder if maybe he did not want her going, but in her stubbornness, she went anyway. To find women, Navy officials looked to the academic community to identify those women who seemed particularly suited to science and technological pursuits, just as they did for men. The Navy consulted with college deans and recruited women from distinguished women's colleges such as Barnard and Radcliffe. The women recruited needed to not only be smart, but discreet. In their recruitment letters and subsequent meetings, women were told not to discuss their work with those on the outside, not even their roommates. Even though May's journey did not start at college, her first stop after enlisting was Hunter College in February 1943, where she was part of the 1st Battalion, 1st Company for boot training. Like the women receiving recruitment letters, she was tight-lipped about the recruitment and testing process, even decades later. In talks she would give to students and other veterans groups, she mentioned having taken a test that demonstrated certain aptitudes, and at one point in the testing process, she was asked if she enjoyed doing puzzles. She said yes, particularly crossword puzzles. I remember her having crossword puzzle books in the magazine rack that sat next to her recliner, so hearing this story did not surprise me. Recruitment ads for all military branches made a connection between wearing a uniform and high fashion. For the Waves, this meant uniforms designed by the high-end New York fashion house Mainbacher's. The Waves had 2 different uniforms, one for summer months and one for the colder winter months. This difference between the summer and winter uniforms was what made the uniforms unique for the Waves, the havelock that covered the wearer from the rain. Proper fit was also an important consideration. By requiring uniforms to be tailored, military officials were able to subtly articulate that uniform alterations were to enhance female silhouettes by making the bust lines and waistlines visible. However, the uniforms still needed to be loose enough for women to carry out their duties. To that end, Waves were guaranteed that their uniforms would be comfortable, yet stylish and trimmed. After the initial intake process, May then went to Georgia State College for Women in Milledgeville, Georgia, for training as a yeoman and for cryptography training. So, in a sense, she did get to go to college, just not in the manner that she imagined. During her time in Georgia, May met Burdett Birch, an Army captain. The story of how they met differed depending on who you talked to. The only constant was that they met in March 1943 in Milledgeville, Georgia, a small town northeast of Macon. May had spent the day in the city shopping with some girlfriends and boarded a bus laden down with bags. Burdett and some Army buddies had earned a day of leave and boarded the bus to attend a USO dance. After hiking 5 miles in an hour that day, Burdett was not giving up his seat. According to Burdett, when May and her friends boarded the bus, expecting to get a seat from the gentleman, Burdett told May that she was welcome to sit on his lap. My grandmother always disputed this. "That's what he says I did, but I don't think I did that," May recalled. They continued their courtship as Burdett was shipped out to the Pacific and May was based in Washington, D.C. as a cryptographer deciphering Japanese code. She was discharged in 1945 as a petty officer first class, and my grandparents were then married in 1946. So, thank you.
So that's it. 12 writers. Wow, a dozen bright lights. We're so honored to have heard your words and to have spent these last few years with you. And I just have a few people to thank. I want to thank all of the people who are with us virtually. That's family and friends. We have some alums in the program and also some faculty and some of our current MFA writers. And we've seen that the chat is really active, so thank you all for participating in the chat. I wanted especially to thank Anna and Ed McCracken for lending us their beautiful, gracious space here so that we could have this event. And we heard the word cohort today, and I think you all started out as a cohort, but then we also heard the word kin a lot, and I think that we've ended up being kin. And I hope that we are. And even though you're graduating, you are still part of the fabric of our program. You're part of our legacy. We're going to watch you. We're going to celebrate you and hopefully stay in touch with you. And now with Facebook, we can really keep track of you too. I just wanted to say that people who make friends in these writing programs, they make lifelong friends. So I suspect that you will be in contact with people in your group. They'll be your first readers, there'll be people you share all kinds of news with, good or bad. you'll rely on them. I've seen this from 25 years of teaching writing, that you make really lifelong friends when you work on writing together. Also, we're looking forward to someday holding your theses in our hands in the form of books. In the last year, I've lost track. I think some of our alums have published about 7 books in the last year. And Kenny Cook alone published 3 books last year. Our current students, our alums. Okay. So, our current students, our alums are publishing poems, stories, essays, just dozens. We can't keep track of it all. We need one staff member just to track our productivity. So we're so proud of you, and we're especially excited to see the book so that we can get your manuscript out of embargo, right? So that it can be released from the embargo in the library. So I'm going to, I believe, end this event now, and just again thank the audience that joined us via Zoom. I'm going to disappoint you a little bit because we are going to go on to eat food from our preferred MFA caterer, which is Jeff's Pizza. We wish that we could send you a piece of pizza over Zoom, but we'll just leave and say thank you all for coming. And we just want to say thank you all, readers, and just one more round of applause.